Hey, thanks, Stephen.
You know, Frank, you've got a very famous name in the U.S. Sorry, Larry, yours isn't quite as noble. Larry, Frank, I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but
for sure I am.
You've probably heard about Frank Robinson. Then you may not be old enough to remember him, but
no, I do for sure.
I object to that comment because if you Google Lawrence Weinberg, and my first name is actually Lawrence, you will discover that I am not the first person that pops up. The first person that pops up is the founder of the Portland Trail Blazers, who is in the NBA Hall of Fame. So, I am a famous namesake after all. So.
Look at that! I learned something new, man. We should put that down in our CLE category there.
Trust me, I learned that too when I Googled myself one time.
Good for you. But Frank, you followed Frank Robinson, the All-Star. I think he was a third baseman for the Baltimore Orioles for years and years. And then, of course,
for sure. I used to play competitive baseball, so the name followed me around, and I was aware. There's a picture of me. I must have been 8 or 9 years old at Cooperstown with his plaque over my shoulder, and I had this big smile. So that's pretty cool. And there's a connection to Canada too, because he was the manager of the Montreal Expos for a long time. So it all sort of comes full circle. There's baseball and the name and Canada. So it's a good segue maybe for you to talk about Canada now.
That's for sure.
But look, I just have to say, if there's Canadians talking baseball, I have to be a part of this.
I love it, Justin. I love how you jumped in there. You couldn't sit back. You had to jump in there.
I have to. It's the Canadian way when we talk baseball. So I was a professor at Guelph for 5 years and went to an enormous number of games. But I was curious with your paper, especially, where are you guys located in Canada?
We're in Toronto.
We're both in Toronto.
Yeah, so you know Guelph well. Someone who actually knows where I work.
Right.
Yeah.
I know where you work. What a fantastic university. Yeah.
There we go.
In a small world, Stephen, Justin's brother JMO and I have been friends since about 5th grade. We grew up together. So we didn't even know he was going to be on here.
And he plays baseball for the Yankees. So I just had to get in here with the whole baseball thing.
Okay. Well, hold on, Justin. You were a welcome participant until you brought up the Yankees.
I became a Yankees fan about 2 Fridays ago when he got traded from the Pirates to the Yankees, and then I just became a fan that day. It happened all at once.
Follow him wherever. So.
Yeah. All right.
Let's not ruin this with the Yankees.
Yeah.
I hear you. I will go back on mute now.
Okay. No, I mean it's his brother. You gotta let him have that. That's really cool, Justin.
Thank you, Frank.
Yes, that's true. Yes,
it's cool stuff. All right, guys, now that you've kind of gotten to know them, let me formally introduce our speakers today. Larry Weinberg is the chair of the franchise law group for the Cassels law firm out of Toronto. Joining him is his partner, Frank Robinson, who is the co-chair of the hospitality law group for the Cassels law firm, also in Toronto. But gentlemen, just to be sure, you guys, your practices, as well as the Cassels firm, you can handle any issue that arises, well, almost every issue that arises throughout Canada in all provinces. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct. We actually have offices in other cities as well, Calgary and Vancouver, in addition to Toronto, but we can handle anything across Canada. That's correct.
Okay, that's great. And for those of you that haven't listened to their TED-style talk, I strongly encourage you to. It was terrific. Lots of details, lots of distinctions between the U.S. and Canadian business practices, the franchise models. I mean, it really, really insightful information. And even though you point out that it's similar, there are some significant differences. And one thing in particular that I wanted to just get us started on, if that's okay. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, if you haven't been on before, feel free to jump in Zoom rooms. It's polite to interrupt, so help yourself. But Larry and Frank, the franchise circumstances are a little different in Canada. Can we start out by just going through that another time so the audience understands those differences?
Sure. I think that was my slide when we did the TED Talk. So why don't I start, Frank, and then you can jump in. So, U.S. style franchise laws exist in Canada in 6 of 10 provinces, which means 4 do not have any franchise law whatsoever. But in the 6 with a franchise law, as I said on the TED Talk, at the 10,000 foot or meter level, as we would say, it's exactly the same as in the US. You prepare a franchise disclosure document, you give it out to somebody, and you have to wait at least 14 days before you take any money or sign any contract. But that's at that level. In the trenches, in the gory detail, they're significantly different. A US FDD does not work in Canada. We take it, we play with it, we muck around with it, we create a Canadian FDD, and we Canadianize the franchise documents for use in Canada to account for the differences in the laws and the differences in the practices. Frank, do you have something to add? Or?
I was going to mention that there's no filing or registration requirements in Canada as there are in the United States, and our colleagues in the United States, and we work with many US attorneys helping their clients and our mutual clients get into Canada. They spend a lot of time dealing with regulators, getting FDDs or disclosure documents filed and registered in particular states. We don't have that in Canada. That makes things a lot easier in Canada to some extent because we don't have that regulatory oversight per se. Where the rubber does hit the road, and when someone tells you that your disclosure document was wrong, is when you end up in court. So it's a private matter between the franchisor and franchisee. And that's a notable distinction in Canada. And it's usually a nice surprise for those who aren't aware of it, because it does cut down time and cost to get your disclosure prepared.
That is good news.
And to add to that briefly, sorry, in the US, because they are filed with regulators, these franchise disclosure documents become public. You can go find them online. In Canada, that's not the case. They're not filed anywhere. So they are private documents and subject to confidentiality most often.
That is interesting. I have a question, but this may be obvious, but perhaps I'm just not thinking it through. I'm assuming one of the first steps a business would want to do if they wanted to expand into Canada would be to create a Canadian entity. But is that always necessary?
Maybe I'll take that one, and that was
sure.
my slide.
Yeah.
Is it necessary? No, it certainly is not. There's no rule of law or anything like that that says you need to create a particular structure to get into Canada. There are many of our clients who will directly franchise using a US entity into Canada. Really what drives the bus on this issue, so to speak, is tax and corporate planning. Is trying to ensure that you can get into Canada in a tax efficient way and get your money back into the United States, likewise in an efficient way, while managing liabilities with respect to franchise issues and other issues. So, it's a bit of a coin flip. I'd say 50-50, or maybe it tends towards, US entities entering into Canada using a US structure. But, the first conversation we have with clients always is, Larry jokes, it's like the simple but most complex question of all is, who is the franchisor, right? It seems like an easy question, but there's a lot that gets baked into that analysis. Again, it's driven a lot by tax, by financing needs, by cash needs, by liability planning, a whole range of things. And so, that's an open question that needs to be assessed by legal counsel, by accounting advisors, and taking into account the company's existing structure at the time that it's planning to come into Canada.
If I can add, a lot of US brands will come into Canada and sort of want to dip their toe, and will often use their existing US companies to franchise into Canada. And not to get in too much gory detail, but they do that because they don't want to become taxable in Canada. They don't want to establish a permanent establishment in Canada so that they're taxpayers in Canada. But that can itself be, in my views over 30 years of watching people do this, that can itself become self-defeating. That itself can inhibit the likelihood of success in Canada. So that's an important point. And actually, to answer your actual question is, what is the first thing you need to do? And maybe you were going to ask this later, Stephen, I don't know. But the first thing someone needs to do, and as I'd like to say, they need to do it yesterday, is register their trademarks in Canada. Because just because your trademark is registered in the US, you should not assume that it is usable or registrable in Canada or any other country in the world for that matter. Because trademarks are protected, of course, on a country by country basis.
That's great insight. Thank you. So
I'll just to kind of close the loop on that. So that was all of the franchising side. Of course, not every restaurant chain wants to come to Canada by way of a franchise model.
Right.
So if you're going to expand in through using a corporate or direct own model, there's a different analysis that happens in terms of your structuring. Trademarks are probably still the same, but it may be a totally different analysis if you want to go into Canada through a corporate model or a hybrid model where you're doing both. I would say for the most part, if you're going to operate restaurants in Canada, that you're going to have a Canadian entity, because then you are certainly doing business in Canada. And so in most cases, if you're going to own restaurants, you will form a Canadian entity. Question is then how is that owned as part of your overall structure? But I would say in that case, it's less of an open question. I'd say it's almost closer to a certainty that you'll have to have a Canadian entity to operate restaurants.
Very helpful. Question, gentlemen, and this may be a little deeper than what you guys typically focus on, but we've in the TED Talk and today we've talked about some of the challenges that might arise with getting money out of Canada, and some of the concerns we have around that, and I'm sure it works the same way, getting money into Canada at sometimes, but perhaps not as much. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, this is, really a tax related issue mostly. Okay. And Frank and I are very savvy at identifying the tax issues for clients. We just make it a habit of not answering them because we're not tax lawyers okay. Or accountants, of course. But the real issue seems to be non-resident withholding tax, which is a question whenever you license from one country to another country, regardless of the countries. It's not unique to Canada and the US. So any franchisee or licensee paying to an American company, the non-resident, royalties for use of intellectual property, which is franchise fees or those or initial franchise fees, those payments are subject to a non-resident withholding tax, and 10 to 25% of that amount is supposed to be withheld by the Canadian in Canada, remitted to our version of the IRS, which is called CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, and that's the non-residence tax payable in Canada. But then that tax is supposed to be a credit to the American on their US taxes. So all that works fine so long as it's structured correctly. And that withholding tax rate depends in part on whether the ultimate owners of the American are all American or residents or citizens of some other country. So if they're all American, like it's common to use an LLC in the US, right? If the owners of the LLC are American, then the withholding tax rate should be only 10% because of a tax treaty between Canada and the US. If they're not American, if they're from some other country, it could be as high as 25%. So again, we know enough to see those issues. The answers really need to come from tax people, tax professionals.
Yeah, that's very helpful and very interesting. You guys also talked about some interesting distinctions from the franchisor perspective in Canada, where they actually often, perhaps often is not the right word, but at times they will oversee the construction. At times they'll do a few other things that are somewhat different than what we do here. And I think if you could expand on that a little bit, or make sure we reiterate that for the folks on the call so that doesn't come as a surprise.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Larry, you might want to jump in at some point. The comment that was made in the slides, and that's made to clients all the time from the US, is you need to be aware and anticipate the reality that in Canada, and especially in certain of the core markets, that landlords are not going to be as receptive as they are in the US to having a franchisee who's, to be honest, a relative nobody and probably doesn't have a lot of capital to go on a covenant on the lease without some form of assurance from the franchisor. So they'll say, we'll lease to this franchisee, but the franchisor needs to give a guarantee or indemnify for the liability on this lease. And so if a landlord's already putting, its neck on the line and its pockets at stake, then it might as well just go on the lease in the first case and control the property. And so that's the reality. And it has been historically and traditionally the case that more often than it is in the US, franchisors will lease properties and then sublet it to their franchisees at the same time they enter into franchise agreements. So now you have a real estate or a tenancy relationship and a franchise relationship. And of course, that changes the power dynamics, the contractual relationships, changes the economics, it changes the risk dynamic. It adds work to a franchisor who now has to be, a real estate professional to some extent, being able to do site selection and negotiate leases and ensure that all that is in order. So that's a new part of the business that is sometimes surprising to U.S. franchisors. Now, I would say most of them, when we have this conversation, will say, "Yeah, we're just not doing that." And
Right.
them who come in from the U.S. don't do it, and they find a way to manage their ways through that. And as more U.S. brands have over the last couple decades come into Canada, I think that setup and that practice has sort of diminished. I also believe that as a result of COVID, where there were franchisors who were holding a whole bunch of leases that are now problematic, I think those companies also are rethinking that and recalibrate their process on that. So I do see the trend moving away from that, but it's not something that can be disregarded entirely, and it's still very much part of the Canadian landscape here.
If I can add, as I said, I've been doing this long enough that I've seen a lot of changes over the years and lived through a number of recessions, and every recession certainly impacts the franchise and restaurant market. So it was certainly the case when I started, 30 plus years ago, that most franchisors in Canada went on the lease and then subleased the franchisees. But as Frank said, more American brands have come up to Canada, do not adopt that approach. And in fact, fewer Canadian brands want to adopt that approach. And so it's not as prevalent as it used to be, but there are still lots of brands who do that. Even some big US brands that are not, that don't do it in the US, do that in Canada. McDonald's historically was well known for taking the lease and subletting in Canada and the US, and they do that in Canada for sure, but other brands do it here as well. And what the upstart new franchisee has to realize is that they are competing for space often against the franchisor of another brand, not just the franchisee of another brand.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Let's shift gears now. And one of your other slides, you focus on potential supply chain challenges, right? And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about that, gentlemen, because I think that's another place that could be, if somebody isn't used to cross-border transactions or international transactions, for instance, they have commissaries, they're trying to make deliveries. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Why don't I start, Frank? So, that actually goes back to the beginning that we talked about, like that dip the toe in the market approach versus being on the ground. Because we've had many clients over the years who just assumed that the way they're going to operate is to import equipment, supplies, inventory, food products from the US to Canada. And they really don't give a thought to, is there another way? And we've had numerous instances where franchisors or companies have discovered that the lower cost answer is to source locally in Canada. And so you need to figure that out. And then, as I think Frank mentioned in the TED Talk, there are just some items that it is really not feasible to bring across the border simply because there are duties, notwithstanding the renegotiated free trade agreement between Canada and the US, dairy products, chicken, those kind of commodities are prohibitively expensive to bring across the border. And candidly, it's for the reasons you think. It's to protect the local supply. The dairy farmers of Canada have a large and important, powerful lobby group, and they have been able to get their way. And so, ice cream, dairy products, cheese can become prohibitively expensive to bring across the border and pretty much need to be sourced in Canada.
So, Larry, you used the word discovered that, it's more expensive in Canada. And so the thing that I always focus on is, when are you going to discover that? Are you going to discover that 6 months before you get to Canada, or a year when you're building your business plan? Or are you going to discover it once your restaurant's open and figure out you can't get your supply? We've had clients I've had a client tell me, we're not coming to Canada until the end of next year. So, 12, 18 months down the road, we got to figure out this supply chain, and we want to make sure it's right from the beginning, because it's not just about the cost of the product. Of course, if it's just about the economics, that's one thing. But of course, every client needs to make sure that the quality and consistency is there. So, yeah, you can go find chicken down the road in Canada, but does it taste like the chicken that you have in the US? So we've had clients who take all the time in the world and nail that and get that right. And then we have others who, are racing to the finish line to get a deal signed because they got a hot deal they got to close, and they find out later that this supply chain's broken and it's kind of hard to fix it after the fact. So, this is another one of those things you maybe want to start doing yesterday, or at least early on in the process, because you can find yourself in a real jam later on if you haven't figured it out.
And I'm not going to name names, but I've had certain, terrible situations arise over the years where it's just a horror show that people did not do their homework, and someone tried to open their doors locally in Canada, couldn't make the product, couldn't source the product they need. Just bad things done backwards, and a lot of finger pointing resulted. So
yeah,
we want to avoid that.
With the finger pointing, it's one thing if you own your own restaurants and you can withstand it and maybe look yourself in the mirror and say, oops, I screwed that up for myself. It's another when you have franchisees who are waiting at their door and saying, what's going on here, guys? And demanding, whatever they're demanding, and your supply chain's not there to fill their restaurants. Now you have another layer of problems. So just to underline that again, this is a big sort of, and anyone who runs restaurants will know this, but it's just sort of orienting your thoughts to the fact that this is now going over the border, and there's a whole set of new issues to figure out.
It comes back to this, Canada, as I said on the TED Talk, it's an international market technically, but it's international light, so to speak. And a lot of American companies would look at it, and they're McDonald's and other brands have been in Canada for more than 50 years. So how different can it be? Well, it's different enough in some cases that attention needs to be brought to this and other issues like this.
Yeah, and I want to pause for just a moment and see if any of the audience has a question. Okay, well, speaking of that, because I do think people are rather surprised. My experience has been, Larry, as you just mentioned, they're going to be rather surprised at several of the things you guys mentioned on the franchising side, supply chain, et cetera. But my experience is they're really surprised around the differences in the employment law aspects, because they seem Canada is much more employee friendly, depending upon the administration in the US, of course, like we talked about earlier. But can we talk a little bit about those particular distinctions, or some of the larger ones that you guys are familiar with?
Well, it is true that it changes by, it seems, the politics more in your country. There's a big swing of the pendulum either way. The whole issue of joint employer and common employer that seems to be very at the forefront now in the US. We're getting some of that here, but it's really a spillover from the US. There's always been a distinction between who's an independent contractor and who's an employee. The test in Canada seems pretty settled, and it's national because it comes from our highest court in the land. So it doesn't vary by state, and I know you have that in the US. California has one law, Massachusetts has another, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot more consistency that way. But generally, employment laws themselves are at the provincial level. Our minimum wage generally is a fair bit higher than it's set provincially, but it's a fair bit higher than in the United States. Right now, I think it ranges anywhere from $11 to $14 or $14.50, depending on the province. And that's a recognition that the cost of living is higher in somewhere like an urban center like Toronto than some rural places. So, but that's the distinction. It's not $7.25 like you have at the federal level in the US. And that has really been depoliticized, because it's in most provinces, it's tied to the rate of inflation. So the government doesn't have to say and jump into that political minefield to say whether we're going to raise the minimum wage or not. It just goes up based on the the rate of inflation. In terms of laws of severance, yes, they're more friendly to employees than in the United States, and that really often so the cost of labor would be higher in Canada, but healthcare is covered. You're not, as a private employer, you're not paying for health coverage, right? Because that the government pays for. People pay that through the general tax base. So General Motors, for instance, builds a lot of cars in the province of Ontario, more cars in Ontario than in Michigan, by the way, and that's in part because the healthcare costs are spread much wider in Canada, and so they are actually lower per person than in the United States.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and then the leave is extensive. The potential for what we call the Family Medical Leave Act here, which we fought tooth and nail over for 6 weeks of leave, it can be much longer in Canada. Do I have that right?
Well,
yeah.
If we deal with a lot of women lawyers in our practice who immediately want to move to Canada because they learn that the maternity leave policies in Canada are at least 6 months and up to a year. Your job has to be held if you want.
Actually, Larry, it's now been extended in Ontario. I don't mean to correct you, but you haven't been pregnant for a long time. I know. It's now in Ontario. I think you can extend it to 18 months. So they'll take your benefits, which were normally paid in 12 months, and just prorate them over an 18-month period. But you're now entitled to that, and it extends to paternal and maternal benefits. So a man can likewise do the same if he chooses.
An employer doesn't have to pay you over that period of time. You get the equivalent of unemployment insurance, or employment insurance, they call it now here, over some period of time, but your job has to be held for you for that period of time. And we, as a law firm, deal with that as well.
Yeah, sure. But it is a significant departure from what we do here, but yes. A lot of it is paid, but you just pointed out that it's paid from a pool similar to unemployment insurance, as opposed to a direct charge back to the employer. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. But Frank, that's interesting. Now it's just been extended you can extend up to 18 months and they have to hold the position.
Yeah, that's right. In Ontario.
Ontario. In the Ontario province.
Employment laws are, as Larry said, state province by province. So they all have different regulations on that. But Ontario had a rather progressive government for a period of time and did push that out.
Very interesting. And so in our time remaining, can you guys give us your perspective? I think this is a fair question. You know how in the US we consider red states and blue states, which are, a little more progressive, or a lot more in some cases, and more conservative. Do the provinces in Canada, can you characterize them that way? Or maybe you get it down more granular to cities like we can do here as well. Can you talk a little bit about that so people have a feel for what's happening there?
I would say every province is maple syrup colored.
Okay.
Okay. I don't even know what that means.
I was just going to ask.
Well, I'll say that certainly urban centers, like in the US, tend to be more blue in your color scheme. And by the way, your color scheme is reversed from ours. Because for more than 100 years now, our Conservative Party of Canada has used blue as their color. Okay. And our Liberal Party, which is the more progressive party of Justin Trudeau, has for well over 100 years used red as their color. So wow. We always have to pause and think which colors we're talking about, because it's reversed here. So anyway, it's the cities tend to be more blue. Western Canada, like Alberta, is our version of Texas. It's oil country, and it's a little more red, generally speaking. And some of the Western provinces. But
you're using U.S. colors, right?
U.S. colors.
Yes, U.S. colors. I'm sorry. Yes, U.S. colors.
Yeah.
And we have swings. We have every province has a conservative party, and at the federal level, and then a more progressive liberal center right, center left party, I guess. But the pendulum doesn't swing as far, it seems, as right or as left, I would say.
And you also, the big difference, I mean, there's lots of them, but I'd say a huge difference in Canada is we have more than two parties, right? We don't have blue and red. We have a wider spectrum, so to speak. There's a party that's further to the left even of the Liberals, called the NDP, and maybe even farther to the left from that, there's a Green Party. And they all have to some extent, some representation at the federal level, and they have greater inroads made in certain provinces. For example, in British Columbia, is pretty far left. There's the Green Party, that's where it sort of originated. And they have greater representation there as well. So, in thinking about the way the colors work out, there's more colors in our map than there would be. It's not as polarized as it might be, because there is some level of nuance in the way that works out.
And in fact, British Columbia, which is the farmost west province on the Pacific, is often called Canada's version of California, because it's the far west, right?
Yeah.
And the government there is pretty left. It's the NDP. It's left of the Liberals. In fact, the center left has sort of collapsed, and you have a far left and a far right party out there.
Wow. Well, let me wrap up with this question. If you guys were going to put in a quick service or fast casual restaurant and you wanted to start out in Canada, which city would you start out in?
That's an easy one.
Yeah, where we are, Toronto.
Toronto. That would be the choice.
I mean, that's there's people who might be Canadian listening to that, and they'll go like this, because Toronto, they think Toronto, people in Toronto believe that Toronto is the center of the universe, the country, the country at least. But the reason there's if you include all the sort of suburbs, etc., I think you're looking at a population of 7 million, 8 million people. It's the financial hub of the country. It's got the most dynamic marketplace. It's got, probably the greatest level of wealth. So, if I was looking to start a new, cool, fancy restaurant chain, I would try to plop it right in the middle of Toronto. You're gonna get the most action, the most business, the most bang for your buck. It'll be much more expensive to operate that one, but and so there may be a strategy where you want to go into lesser markets, but I think Toronto is probably what most people think as where you're going to make it.
I'll end by saying Chick-fil-A came up to Canada a few years ago, plopped their first restaurant right downtown in the center of Toronto, lineups out the door, because Canadians have traveled in the US a lot, have seen Chick-fil-A, have heard about Chick-fil-A, want to know what the buzz is all about. And despite the pandemic, they just announced 2 days ago they're opening 7 more restaurants in the Greater Toronto area. So
wow.
And they actually picked probably the most, like, the busiest intersection in Toronto. So if you wanted to even get more granular, the busiest part of the busiest city in the country, that's where they plopped that down. It's a beautiful restaurant, and apparently it's doing really well.
Yeah, they're good at picking out locations. Gentlemen, can't thank you enough. This has been terrific, fascinating information and insight, and I know everybody got a lot out of it. So want to thank both Frank and Larry for your time and expertise, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.